Well, Harley Davidson, I am joined by you again. I know you've been a guest on our Paramotor Nation a couple times when you were doing the 50 state challenge. You were also doing the cross country from San Diego all the way over to Florida. And Harley, I'm really excited that you're giving me this opportunity to talk to you yet again. You know, there's so many things that a lot of us in our community try to do to help the community out, the community at large, as far as protecting people, giving them good information to keep them safe. And I think this is an opportunity to do something like that right here, because in your travels, this huge, amazing feat of traveling and hitting all 50 states, and then topping that off with going across the United States from coast to coast in 9 days. You know, there's a lot of things that you encountered that a lot of us don't have to encounter, things that we talk about. And you certainly are a person that has gotten that opportunity to have the experiences and are able to share some of those experiences, what happened, and how you kept yourself alive. So thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I appreciate you spending this time with me and to help me make this video. You know, sort of what led to inspiring me to make this video was that I watched Tucker's video on his sort of thoughts around the latest fatalities, and I know that it doesn't always go down well with people. And in my case, I was thinking about my own experiences, and I've had a fair amount of time to reflect over the last couple months, but also even since going to the Arizona Circus and Salton Sea. And it occurred to me that I'd had some experiences that were quite similar, and I thought it was time for me to share about them. I tend to be pretty quiet about my own sort of things that haven't gone quite to plan. Not many people know this, but I had a very rough start when I started flying in the paramotor. I broke 2 ankles in 2 different landings in the same year, and then even broke a shoulder a couple of years later. And so it's amazing that I'm still flying, but in all of those cases, I made critical errors. And so what I wanted to try and share and talk about through this video was, like, when it comes to things like, torque twist, wing collapsing, flying at fly-ins, and with a lot of pilots around, there are some things that have happened to me that I think I can speak about firsthand, and the things that I've learned there that I hope are good takeaways for other people, or at least some food for thought.
So I know right after Thanksgiving, you started the coast to coast trip. And I know me personally, a lot of our friends, that we were all very excited, waiting for the day that we heard that you were starting it off. But what a lot of us didn't know, and I found out from you later on, is it was almost over before it even began. What happened on that the first day?
Team had all arrived in San Diego, and we're staying with Anthony Gringo, and he had arranged for us to basically do like a mini gathering with the Raptors. And so we went out there, and this was the day before I was going to start the coast to coast, and essentially got to fly with a couple of the guys. And it was during that launch that things really almost went awry. As you'll see from the video here that I'm going to share, is that there was significant twist. And when I landed, I talked to Ray Pierce, my crew chief, and he says, "We've got to do something. You're not going to fly it like that. It's just plain dangerous."
We got a problem, don't we?
Huh?
We got a problem, don't we?
It's pretty squirrely.
Yeah, but you're torque twisting really bad.
I played it off.
Oh, it's all right.
You know how close you were on a couple of those climb outs, just going around?
So if I think about how we got there on that day, about a week before we traveled down to San Diego, I had a problem where the prop was just too close to the extended fuel tank that we had. I went ahead and made some adjustments to the mounts to make sure that I had a bigger gap between the tank and the prop. And at the same time, they also replaced my standard swing arms with the Acro CNC arms that they had, and gave it back to me. Also got the wing from the Hadron 3 that I got from Paradrenalin. And so I got to fly that just one time before going down to San Diego, and I did experience torque. And I thought it was just because I was kind of hammering it. I was really just pushing myself, and I don't know why, but for some reason or other, it didn't exactly register that, hang on a minute, maybe there's something wrong with the changes. And this wasn't just me sort of throttling up and really forcing the wing to talk. And in fact, when we got to San Diego, we went one step further, which is that we added in a new prop and the new cruise control throttle. And so this is one of the things that I wanted to mention, because I didn't put it together to begin with. Was, well, hang on a minute, we just made 5 or 6 different significant changes, and I don't know, any one of those might have been responsible, but I didn't actually put it together. And then when I had someone say,
Twisting to the left under the wing.
Well, we can try.
Is there
A
a way?
little late.
Yeah, but every time you go under power, you twist to the left under that wing. Makes me awful nervous.
hang on a minute, this is unsafe, we need to do something about it. I said, we don't have any time left. We're launching tomorrow. And I played it off and I said, oh, I can manage it, right? And unfortunately, looking back at it now and reflecting on other incidences, I know that I made a very, very big decision that day. And in fact, on the coast to coast, I can't say any more than that right now, because we're going to share the big thing that took place during the coast to coast, but it was nearly over.
Do you remember what I said to you a couple months before you started this expedition? Do you remember? Because I know you didn't like what I said to you.
I probably don't remember.
I said to you, maybe it wasn't even that long, maybe it was a week or two before, but I remember saying to you, Harley, if it's not right, if it doesn't feel right, if you think you're going to endanger your life, don't worry about how many people are watching you. Call it off, buddy. No one is going to be upset with you for not putting your life at risk.
Yeah,
do you remember that?
I do remember that now, and I think that probably came up during the course of the show. And look, I knew that I was going to be pushing pretty significantly on the coast to coast. I was, I had publicly set a 14-day period, but very few people knew that I'd set an internal goal of 10 days. And so, the point being was that not only were there equipment changes that contributed to this talk to us problem, but also I went one step further, which is that I ignored the advice that I had from people who were giving up their time to come help me be safe. Mm-hmm. And so that was a big thing. And I want to encourage people that, when you're in a situation where you're flying in an unfamiliar area, there are lots of people around, you're flying equipment that maybe has had some changes, you probably want to create a lot more room for things to go wrong. And, that's an observation that I see sometimes at fly-ins when there's a lot more people around. If something is going to start to go wrong, well, the last thing you want to be is anywhere near people or other things like campers and trucks and so forth. And I see this happen far too many times, especially when there is a lot of people at a fly-in, is people start taking off and then want to fly over some vehicles to go somewhere. But in those first few seconds of takeoff, which is when most of us are going to experience severe torque, when we're pushing that throttle to the extreme, if something starts to go wrong where we should come off the throttle, right? The first step we do is, if we're having torque twist, is to back off the throttle. You don't come off it entirely, but you want to back off. If you don't have room to work and you can't come off the throttle, you can land up with something much worse happening. Pick people that you trust and that you can spend some time with, and listen to what they're telling you if there's something wrong. And in fact, when I got to the Salton Sea, I'd had a new frame put on to replace the one I dented during the coast to coast. And I'd gone back to the regular swing arms that I had used before. And as it turned out, I thought my hang point felt good, but I also thought it might be a little bit far back. And I finally did. I asked somebody else that said, hey, when I fly by, I mean, does it look like my engine's leaning back a little? Feels good, but maybe it's too far. And the advice was, yeah, you should probably make that change. And I went back and later looked at a video, and absolutely, it was too far back. And as we all know, if you don't have your hang points set up correctly, even if it feels comfortable, if it's too far back, you once again, you increase the risks of torque twist, creating an entire riser twist. And so having experienced that firsthand, I've flown with torque a couple times, but definitely that day before we started the coast to coast was probably the worst that I'd ever experienced up until that point. And fortunately, I did all the right things, right? I turned into the torque, I reduced power, I had room to work with, and everything went well. But there's, things could have gone very, very horribly wrong, and it could have all been over before we even started.
One of the things as we become more tenured pilots and we're talking with newer pilots, we talk about making sure that you're not distracted. And I think you just said the word distractions were coming into play. If you're setting up, you want to make sure no one's distracting you, that you're going through the exact same routine. But here it sounds like I think you said 5 different things you had just done to this machine. That's a lot of stuff to be taken on and not being comfortable with one thing at a time. Do you think that those distractions played into this issue?
Absolutely. And the reason is, I was under other pressure to go and fly. And it didn't give me the opportunity to really assess all of the components that had changed. And the worst, egregious thing that I did was not listen to advice. So I think, most accidents, right, it's a series of things that were either ignored or weren't perceived that leads to an accident. And so if you have a problem, I wanted to say this to the very end, but do something about it. I think that's critical. I think the video will show that, it was very clear that there was a problem. I think my takeaway is that I happened to be fortunate enough that I did all the right things, but as a new pilot, I don't think I would have done all the right things. And more importantly, I had room to work and work through those issues. And I think a lot of times when we see people, land in trees or fly into cactus and so forth, they overestimated the amount of room that they have to work. And it's not when things go well, it's when things don't go quite well. A little bit of hesitation on the motor, sticky throttle, whatever it is, all of those things contribute.
So you had swing arms and hang points, a new wing that you were working with, a new throttle, a new 3-blade prop. And then what had happened to your engine mount plate?
The engine mount plate had accidentally been put on backwards. And so with the Blackhawk systems, traditionally the engine is offset to combat torque. And in this case, it was offset the wrong way, actually aggravating or making torque far worse than it ever had. And so that actually was the problem. All these other things, all the other changes that I had made weren't directly responsible. But because I had made all those changes, that's where my focus was, rather than focusing on the number one thing, which is that we changed the position of the engine. And so I think I was distracted by all the other things and didn't focus on the main problem, which was that the engine offset was incorrect. So ultimately, I was at fault for not checking it, and even when flying it, perceiving that it was something else. Yeah, I do have a rule of 3. If I make 3 mistakes in a row, so I blow a launch, I forgot to buckle a strap and something else, I ground myself. It's one of the very few rules that I actually have for myself, and that I make sure that I maintain this, because I've had some things almost go wrong because I forgot. It was one time I think I almost forgot to take off without a helmet because I was in such a hurry to go. And so my rule of 3, generally speaking, is something that I follow. Obviously, when you're doing coast to coast, where you're trying to set a record and there's a lot at stake, that's where the team was so critical, was to do all the checks that I might otherwise miss because I was so focused on what I had to do. And so, even during the coast to coast, there was one flight that will come out that myself and Ray made a critical error. Typically most of us don't fly in challenging environments where there's pressure to actually fly. And so, ideally you don't have that pressure, and take it off yourself. You don't need it.
I agree. I think that rule of three is a great rule. It's one that I live by too. A lot of tenured pilots live by the rule of three. And when you make that third mistake, you're not punishing yourself. You're saving your life, because it really tells you, whether you like it or not, mentally you're not ready to fly today. And it's a good idea to take it off, enjoy the weather, enjoy the scenery, go home, save it for another day. It's so hard to do that. And I want to say Chris Santa Croce said this once, but I could be wrong. It could have been someone else. They said, go out to your favorite field on the most beautiful day you can, take all of your equipment with you, and then turn around and go straight back home. And it teaches you to walk away from even the best day.
Yep.
And
No, it does.
You got to do it. Let's switch gears. I know you had a big collapse in your wing. When did this happen?
Yeah. So this was about 2 months after the 50 state tour, and about 2 months before I did the coast to coast. So at that point, I was in the decision-making process of doing the coast to coast. And one of the things that I knew that I wanted to do was an SIV. This particular incident reinforced the need for having additional training. One of the things that, up until the 50 state tour, I had been a very conservative pilot. I hadn't flown very many wings, and primarily because I got hurt before, and I really didn't want to get hurt again. And another major injury similar to the ones that I had could result in, me not being able to have feet anymore or walking. So it's critical in my own mind to be as safe as I can, because I've made mistakes that my body won't take again. And so what I learned through the 50 state tour was I was having so much more fun because I was flying all these different wings. I got to meet so many different people, and my flying dramatically improved. My skill sets got much better. But the other thing that I found was that I was starting to do more maneuvers and things like that, all of which I felt were adding more risk to the type of flying that I was doing, and that it made sense for me to take on some additional training. And for the first time in flying was that, I was like, now I might finally be ready to take on, an SIV class. And so I did. I went ahead and I took an SIV with Andy at Skylab, as had so many other people in the circle, in the tighter circle, I would say, and such great reviews and so forth. And I went out there and I learned so much. And my main reason for wanting to do that SIV was after the wing collapse, where I had been flying sort of mid-morning, and I had come over a valley and really, quite frankly, just misjudged the airflow and the fact that there would be a lot of thermals coming after there. And I'd had some minor collapses before on a different wing, but I'd never had my snake collapse. Not in all 50 states had it ever collapsed on me. And I had done hundreds of flights on it.
What altitude were you at when it collapsed?
I was at about 2,000 feet when it collapsed, and I lost about a third of the wing on the left side. And that glider, it's a sea glider. It's maneuverable, and so it died very, very quickly. And of course, the first thing you do is you come off the throttle and then fly the glider. And so I had obviously taken the experience that I had and watched some other videos, and I had gave in some input. And at about 1,000 feet, I was able to recover the wing.
So I want to ask you, so without having the proper training at SIV, you looked up at the glider, I'm assuming, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the moment it started to collapse on me, I was able to look at that glider and start to see what was going on.
So did you feel like you said it was the left side of the glider? So did you feel that brake line was just completely loose and there was nothing, there was no pull on the brake at that point?
There was nothing there. I mean, I was instantly in a spiral at that point.
Okay.
And it was probably the most severe wing collapse I'd ever had.
So what I'm looking to do right here is to take what you thought you knew at that time because you watched some videos and how you reacted to it. This is going to be great education for new people. And then after the SIV, what you would have done. So what did you do at that time, thinking you were doing the right thing at that moment?
Yeah, so I immediately gave a little bit of left brake to try and fly the glider straight and come out of that spiral after easing up on that throttle. And then from there, as I was able to slow the wing down, I could turn, and eventually I was able to reinflate the left side. I think I did everything that I could do. I think the number one mistake I made that day was I was still flying without a reserve. I think the second mistake was that I overestimated where the airflow was coming through for the area that I was flying. It was an area that I was unfamiliar with, and should have probably taken more precautions. And then last of which was, did I do all the right things to recover the wing? Well, I'm still here, so I must have done something right, but I didn't know if I was doing everything correctly. And so that's why it really became the catalyst to go take the SIV. And it was during the SIV that I discovered that I think I was doing a lot of things correctly, but I was also, put through a series of other types of collapses that I think made me a better pilot and more prepared. And so, I think I discovered I was doing some things correctly, but I also learned some new techniques and some better ways of solving those types of problems, not only for the type of collapse I had, because we all know, right, the wing can collapse in different ways, and that can be, a pretty significant threat.
All right, so I want you to make our instructor, Andy Fuller, proud. Now, looking back, what would you have done differently now that you've taken an SIV course?
That's difficult to try and say specifically, because I think it's much more of a reaction to what you're trying to do. And I think one of the things I take away with an SIV is that most people do one and then they never do another one. And as you know, from my coast to coast, I went ahead and did another SIV right after the coast to coast. So in a matter of 2 months, after a huge amount of flying, went ahead and did that second SIV. And it was during that SIV that I went ahead and I did some more advanced maneuvers. I went through the course, and then towards the end of the course, Andy said, "Hey, why don't you go ahead and on your own, go ahead and do a couple of these maneuvers." And I got to tell you, the first couple I did, I was mixing up different kinds of maneuvers, and it looked ugly. It felt terrible. It was awful. And in fact, my very last maneuver that I did all on my own, came out of the sat. It caused the whole front of the wing to surge forward quite dramatically. And at the same time, I also landed up with a massive big cravat in the one side of the glider. And the whole time, Andy was in my ear talking to me. He says, "Well, you probably need to stall that glider again and see if you can fix that." And it was at that point in time, I looked at it, and I'd had enough at that point. And I made the decision to throw the reserve at that point. And so one of the reasons I want to talk about it is because not only had I gone through a couple of SIVs and I'd learned a tremendous amount, I had done a lot of flying, I had improved my skills quite dramatically, but there's a difference between following instruction and doing things on your own. And what I proved to myself was that I might not actually be ready for doing some of those maneuvers on my own, because when I tried to do them all by myself, I made a mistake. And in fact, the mistake was critical enough that, the outcome was that I threw a reserve, but that wing had surged so much that I could have landed up in a situation where I could have gift wrapped it myself, or something else could have been way more dramatic, and that would have been far more serious.
Mhm.
And so, my takeaway from this was that, good training is good. Having a good instructor that you trust is great. I had all those things. But ultimately, when you as the pilot make a very significant mistake, you're accountable. And unfortunately, if you make the mistake badly enough, it's going to be unforgiving. And so, I could I have gift wrapped myself? Yeah, I think about that now. At the time, I kind of shrugged it off. And in fact, after the SAV, I remember talking with Leah, and she asked me a question, and I don't quite remember what it was, but it was kind of to the effect that I was going, what am I going to do next? And her response was wrong answer. And it kind of took me aback at that point in time. I was like, damn, Leah, you're tough, which we all know Leah is. She tells it how it is, right?
Oh, yeah.
But I've had some time to reflect on that and think about it. And she was dead on. And it did. It gave me a moment for pause and just say, look, hey, just because you've learned a few things and your skills are getting better, doesn't mean that you can't make mistakes, especially if you don't have somebody helping you to do something that you've learned that maybe you've got the basics down. It's kind of like when we're learning to fly, we get the basics down. It's not pretty, but we pull it off. And then we want to move on to other things before maybe we fine tune that. And so my takeaway with the SAV is a necessity. You are increasing your risk, but you're going to develop skills that maybe the skills aren't even a direct correlation, but they help to get your brain thinking about how to solve problems when they happen. And most of the time we have more time. In hindsight, had I listened to Andy, and also if I tried to collapse that wing and let it reopen, I probably could have pulled that off. And I think that was the correct response that I had, rather than screw this, I'm going to throw the reserve.
Harley, I'd asked you, what would you have done differently? Because in my mind, I already had my own answer from what I was hearing of what was going on. My answer in my mind, what I was expecting, I would have leaned to the right and really put all of my weight on the right side, fly the right side of the glider that was open, and try to work it out at the same time. And at the end of the day, if it didn't work, I would have probably gone into a full stall and tried to reset my wing. But you answered it better than I would have imagined, because you said something very profound, and everybody should know that. One way we say it is pilot in command, but you said ultimately, I'm responsible, I'm accountable for everything out there, not the person that's hollering out. And I had made the decision to throw the reserve. I want to talk about one other thing here, and that's mid-air collisions. And I understand you almost got into one in yourself.
I've been witness to a couple of these over the years, and some more what I like to call near misses. I never really liked that term very much, but it was one that they used a lot at Chevron, which was basically reporting something that almost landed up in an accident. Salton Sea, which, was a big fly-in this year, I think probably more than 200 pilots there. It was very busy, and I flew on the Friday, and I think just a little on the Saturday. And like a lot of the other pilots, I had my camera out and I was trying to record because the light's beautiful out there. And as you'll see in the video here is, this guy had taken off and he was climbing out, and he was basically, coming in towards my line of flight and from a low angle. So unless he looked up, he probably wouldn't have been able to see me. And I was recording at the time, and I remember seeing him coming up and making that note, like, hey. And so I kept watching him, and you'll hear here where I yell out at him because he got close enough and he was flying directly towards me. I don't know if he heard me, but at some point in time he must have seen me. I had already decided to start steering in a different direction and head somewhere else, but it did sort of once again raise this point where, when you're at fly-ins, there's a lot going on, not only for yourself, but also for other pilots. And it's necessary for us to be much more vigilant than we might normally be. It's one thing if there are 2 or 3 other or 4 or 5 other pilots around, but when the air is filled with 20, 30, 200 pilots, whatever it is, not only do you have to be aware of exactly what you're doing and sort of create your own 360-degree bubble, but also you kind of got to have the awareness of everyone else's bubble and how that's going to touch you. And so not only being aware of what's going on, where are you going to go if you have to make that maneuver? And we often see people who are spiraling down or doing stuff, they can't necessarily see what's going on down below them, or they're climbing out and they can't see what's going on above them. So for me, I made a couple notes here of sort of what I thought about it was that, I mean, it wasn't terribly close, but it was close enough that it caused me to scream out at the guy. And this comes back to what I was saying earlier, is that when you are at fly-ins, my recommendation is create more room that you might ordinarily do for when things could go wrong. And it might not even be you where it's going wrong for, it could be going wrong for somebody else. And so I think it's essential that we as pilots, when we're in high traffic areas, we've got to be much more proactive in considering what our next move is when there's so many pilots around.
I think a lot of this comes from experience, just like in anything else that we do. People shouldn't be going to fly-ins if they've only flown a dozen times or if they just got out of training, unless they are really, really comfortable with it. Maybe a more congested fly-in isn't the place to make your first fly-in.
Well, at the very least, I would say that if they're going to fly, probably where they can launch off and take off, where there's less traffic, that they leave the area and they go somewhere else. I'm a proponent of having people come to fly-ins. You know, even if you don't fly or don't have a lot of experience, you can see and learn a great deal. You want to take those additional precautions about where you take off, where you're going to fly, and make sure that you're doing it in a less congested area, that you limit the risk to others and to yourself, that, based off your experience.
Sure. And even coming to a fly-in and just watching how people fly out there and seeing, how you keep your distance, that comes into with experience that you're adding for yourself. In addition to that, and going back to SIV, you've taken a couple SIVs, and I had a conversation with Josh Bowden of Nebraska Paramotor not too long ago, and I said something, and I thought it was really profound. And if anything ever comes back to be something that I said, or someone quotes me, it would be something like this. And I said, SIV, it's like CPR. It's something that should be done every couple of years for a refresher, because in 2 years, I may not think in the heat of the moment of how to properly stall my wing. So by practicing it every 2 to 3 years, I think is imperative for everybody to do.
Yeah. And, just because you've taken an SIV doesn't mean that you're going to be competent to solve all those problems. And I think that's key to what I'm trying to say to you today, is that don't become overconfident just because you've had additional training or because you've developed a certain amount of experience. I mean, I'm not the same pilot I was 3 months ago. I'm definitely not the same pilot that I was, at the end of 2019. I'm a very different pilot. Now, I've built up a lot of experience very quickly, as do a lot of other pilots, but I also had the time where, you could say I was scared. I think if I'm honest about it, I was scared of getting hurt again. I loved the flying, so I was very cautious about it. So SIVs are important, but I think assessing your own skills and continuing to develop your skills through, having good mentors, people that you trust. We see a lot of people asking for advice in the paramotor groups, and of course it becomes very noisy very quickly, and a lot of people have very strong opinions. And I guess my perspective on that is rather pick a couple of people that you trust, that you can talk through things, and it's usually your close paramotor pilot friends. Hopefully you got a couple in there that have more experience than others, and learn that way. The online forums and the groups are great for broad information, but honestly, trust the people that are close to you probably more, and listen to what they've got to tell you.
So Harley, I know you're a big advocate of safety, and I'm going to tell you right now, the first time I flew with you, I was very nervous. I never said this to you because I watched you ground start your motor, and that's something that a lot of people are like, I don't want to fly with anybody that's going to ground start. why are you comfortable ground starting your motor when there's so many people out there making a good reason why not to start your motor on the ground as opposed to on your back or on a rack?
Most of us who ground start is probably because we're struggling with an engine that doesn't start on the first pull. And there are a number of reasons for that. What I like about my Corsair Black Devil is that it has the flash starter, and if you've primed it correctly, it's one pull and it starts. And in fact, even with my Vittorazzi, when I primed it correctly and I understood how my engine worked and what it liked, it was, it's kind of like having a girlfriend. You've got to listen and learn. I discovered what worked, and so I stopped ground starting. The only time I ever ground started was because, the damn thing wouldn't start. I'd have to pull it 3-4 times and get the fuel coming through. So I agree. No one should be ground starting. If you're having a problem, you should probably have a buddy help you pull start it. And in fact, flying in buddy teams is a good idea. I have to admit, I'm terrible for that because I like flying on my own a lot. I don't happen to always have people around me that I can go fly with. But it's not a bad idea to fly and have a wingman with you. And of course, when you're starting those motors, that's a good time to work together as a team. I taught scuba diving for 20 years. We always required a buddy. It's not a bad idea. Yeah, so, I'm sorry it scared you. But it does raise an interesting point. I remember one flight when I was down in Salton Sea this year where I came in over some campers, and I was coming into land because of the way the wind was. And I came in pretty hot. And I remember seeing a guy duck. And I'm not proud of myself. I've thought about it. And I'm like, I wish I could apologize to that guy because it was a terrible decision. And it was me hot dogging, having fun. But if you're scaring people on the ground with your flying, go do it somewhere else where people can't see you. We often see this at fly-ins too, people hot dogging and they demo some of their skills and so forth. And there's some Kodak moments going on. None of us need that Kodak courage. We have enough courage of our own to be ourselves and to go do the good things that we want to do. So I've had some time to think about it. And, even when I was at Arizona Flying Circus, I did very little flying, and mostly because I really just wanted to enjoy the atmosphere and the people that were there and not fly when it was busy. And so what I have taken from some of what I experienced over the last couple of months is that I want to be a better advocate than I think I'm a decent advocate. I like to promote the sport and do good things and do it safely. But if someone is ducking when I'm flying over them, then I'm doing something wrong, and I want to change that. And so that's one of the decisions I've made in the last few weeks.
Good for you. Last question I have for you is this: what are some of the other big takeaways that you have in all of this that you've learned in this past year?
Yeah, let me see if I can summarize those very quickly, because I know I sent you a long list of notes, and maybe you'll catch any that I missed here. But
I'm supposed to say that. It's all off the cuff.
All right, it is kind of, well, I thought about it because sometimes you miss some of these points, but I would say the first one is, no matter what your experience, be humble, because the sport has a funny way of humbling you. And when it does, it's not pretty. Sometimes we walk away from it, but it can be more serious. I think, we tend to take more chances as we become more experienced. And my recommendation is think about that, because it's always the more experienced person that tends to get hurt. It's less likely to be the newcomer, because they tend to be more cautious. They know they don't have the skills and so forth. And while they'll make mistakes, they're less likely to be a big deal. But it's the big maneuvers that land to big mistakes and people getting hurt. I think the next thing I would say is don't ignore problems. And I'm definitely foul of doing this. A kill switch that isn't working isn't the end of the world. And I've done a number of flights over the years where the kill switch either wasn't working or occasionally it wouldn't work. And in fact, even on the cross country, when I was flying over water, I had a line short and cause an engine out. And I knew the problem was there, but I had ignored it. So definitely don't ignore those problems. I don't care what it is. Take care of it, and rather lose a flight and take care of it and have good flights where you can trust your motor. I'm a big, everyone says, fly like your motor is going to quit any minute, but I have perfect faith in my motor. And if you do the maintenance and you do all the things that you should do, worn wires and whatever it is that can cause an engine out are avoidable, I think. So I think take care of that. Pick a mentor. I think I mentioned that earlier. Pick people you trust. And if you're not sure about something, or it's you've made an adjustment, get somebody else to take a look at it and see if it looks right. I think that's critical. And Ray's going to be I told you so, because Ray's job was to keep me safe during the coast to coast, and his job was to keep me in balance and give me the checks. And I didn't always listen. My job was to keep going, and his job was to keep me balanced. And I ignored him, and I know that worried him a great deal. So, pick a mentor and listen to what they've got to say. Forget about those Kodak moments. Just let the film roll. If it catches something cool, great. But if you want to create them, fine, plan them and work with some people, and do it where you minimize this risk to other people. Don't do it at fly-ins. Get your B-roll at fly-ins, but go do the big maneuvers that you're trying to capture something. Do it somewhere else. You didn't see me trying to do the Red Bull grab at a fly-in. I did that out on the playa where there was nobody there, and if I'd made a mistake, it would have been me who got hurt. And I think the last thing, and I think you talked about this, as far as your response would be, is run scenarios through your head and practice how you're going to react to certain things that happen. And I know I used to do that when I was in law enforcement, and if somebody did this, how was I going to react, and so forth. And I think as pilots, when you watch pilots who have solved, I just recently watched this video of a pilot that had an engine blow apart on the way to Hawaii, and how they flew the aircraft and everything that they had to do. He had a lot of experience, but also he had run scenarios through there. They trained for that kind of thing all the time. And while they had a lot of things that happened in that flight that they hadn't trained for, the training and running through scenarios and working together with other people meant that they landed safely. And I think that's true for us. It's aviation. We can do so much to keep ourselves safe and be prepared, I think.
Harley, you have given us so much good information, so many good things to think about. If I was a new pilot or someone that was about to go through training or even considering getting into paramotoring, this is a video I would probably go back to the very beginning, grab a pad of paper and a pencil and start writing a lot of notes down, because you've given all of us a lot of good stuff to think about. Even tenured pilots, we become complacent at time, and these are the things we should constantly be thinking about. So I thank you for that. Thank you so much. I was honored that you asked me to be a part of this video with you. And if you would like to learn more about Harley's adventures, he has a website, 50X Challenge. You can go to that, a YouTube channel as well, a Facebook page as well, all 50X Challenge. I'm sure all the links are going to be in the description of this video.
Yep.
And obviously, our Paramotor Nation, that's my show. I have co-hosts Dave Ruff and John Ripa. And that's every Sunday night at 9 o'clock Eastern time, where we have guests like Harley that join us, that give us a lot of great information. So if you're new to the sport, or if you're thinking about getting into the sport, a lot of great information on the channels. And Harley, if you wouldn't mind, if you could put a link to that channel as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Dave. Thank you so much for helping me to do this. I think we covered quite a lot of material, and people are welcome to DM and send me questions if they have them.
Awesome. Thank you, Harley. I appreciate it, buddy.
All right, man. Thank you.
Bye-bye.